political correspondent at The Spectator and friend of the show, James Heal. Good afternoon to you.
Afternoon, Julia.
Thanks so much for joining us. Let's talk about, first of all, about, I'll get to the Rwanda bill. I want to talk about the Houthi rebels, first of all. More airstrikes overnight. We weren't told in advance, obviously, about these airstrikes on the Houthi rebels attacking commercial shipping in the Red Sea. But there's also a claim and a counterclaim. I want to know what the latest is in Westminster of whether or not Sir Keir Starmer and the Commons Speaker, Sir Lindsay Hoyle, whether they were told and why should they need to be told?
Well, I think it's usually, in terms of tradition, you normally brief the opposition on these things. You try and make sure all parties are aware of this. This is done on Privy Council terms. So I believe that during the first Gulf War of 1990, Margaret Thatcher and Neil Kinnock did similar at that time. But look, last time this happened 2 weeks ago, there was briefing involved at the time. And there were concerns on the American military side that information on the Westminster side in London had leaked out about the attack prior to it being cleared for operational use. And so therefore this time Sir Keir Starmer, John Healey, the Shadow Defence Minister, and Speaker of the House Lindsay Hoyle were not told about it. And so there's been a bit of a war of words this morning with claim and counterclaim about who knew what and when. And now we're expecting to see a statement from Rishi Sunak in 20 minutes in the House of Commons.
I was going to say, Hugh Merriman, the minister out the media rounds this morning, said he had been told by Number 10 they had been told. Does it matter, though? I mean, does it matter? Well, Keir Starmer's not the sodding Prime Minister. He's not the Defence Secretary. He's going to find out when you and I find out.
Well, I think that, per convention, if you want to take military action and you don't want to go to the Parliament because obviously it's massively impractical to announce you're going to do an airstrike and recall the whole House of Commons, you ought to probably keep involved some of the opposition leaders. That would be the argument Labour would make, certainly. And so I think that that's going to be a debate we see play out. Remember, of course, that Keir Starmer wants to keep his whole party on side. He sees some criticism from the left of the party. The SNP are certainly making that claim. So it all comes down to convention, really. Right. But certainly, I think that it shows that after the last time, the Brits are very worried about making the Americans annoyed at them again.
Indeed. Well, the Prime Minister, you just touched on it there, is due to make a statement, we think as early as 12:30 today, about these airstrikes, an emergency statement. What sort of detail are we expected to hear?
Well, we're expecting him really to restate the British position on all this, which is simply as a cut and dry paste in international law. You have a case where these Houthi rebels are attacking international shipping in the Red Sea. Therefore, this is the principle of deterrence. So I think we'll see virtually the same statement we saw 2 weeks ago on the 11th of January when the Prime Minister defended the airstrikes by the British and Americans against this. And I suspect we'll see some noises off from the SNP. But frankly, Labour really rowing in behind the government, despite the way in which, as you said earlier, Hugh Merriman handled this on the morning round. Yeah,
indeed. And of course, apart from the usual suspects on the Labour benches, of course, and saying, well, these Houthi rebels, they say if it's all to do with attacks on Gaza by Israel in the wake of the Hamas attack on October the 7th, and if Israel stopped bombing, they'll stop missile attacks on ships. I mean, yeah, that's how we do international diplomacy now. We do what the Houthi rebel, Islamist lunatic terrorists want us to do. I mean, yeah, it's extraordinary, isn't it? But anyway, that's how our politics rolls now. Let's talk about Rwanda. It was a vote in the House of Lords last night, but this wasn't a vote on the safety of Rwanda bill, the one we were talking about in the Commons the other day. Tell us what this vote was actually all about and how significant that loss is, voting 214 to 171 to delay this policy. Does that really have any particular significance? Is that a worry for the government?
Well, it's a warning shot, certainly. And the fact that the House of Lords, by quite a big margin, around 50 votes or so, did vote down the treaty that the UK government signed last month with the Rwandans. And this, of course, comes ahead of next week when the bill will be put down amendments in the House of Lords on that flagship piece of legislation. Now, this treaty that was rejected last night, under the existing legislation, it means that the government can simply override them using the Commons as per the terms of the Parliament Act. But the point is that the Lords are clearly in quite a bolshy mood. The fact that they felt able to take the advice of some of the Labour peers on this and vote against a treaty that the elected government that they had signed would suggest that they're not going to give this legislation an easy ride, despite all the warnings and blood-curdling threats from the Conservatives. And of course, Rishi Sunak's press conference less than a week ago when he warned about overriding the will of the people.
Yeah, I mean, that's the interesting thing. And we know at the end of the day, constitutional niceties that would ping-pong, as they call it, between the Commons and the Lords, the bill will get through. but because the right of the democratically elected to the House of Commons to reign supreme. However, it depends how long it all takes and whether a flight ever ends up taking off before the next general election, whenever it is. But we know, one of the dates that's possibly up for a general election could be the same date as the local elections. We are 100 days away today. Oh, the glamour from the local and mayoral elections that are coming up on May the 2nd. Also, handy note for your diaries, my birthday. I'm going to be 21 again. Very unhelpful of them to have an election on my birthday, as they often do, those local elections. But that is when, let's face it, everything is gearing towards a general election this year. But actually, a lot of the people who go out campaigning, they're the ones who do the campaigning in the local elections. If, as many expect, there is an absolute pounding for the Tories, that's going to leave a very sort of disconsolate, very unhappy Conservative Party and Conservative membership and councillors to go and do that campaigning later in the year, isn't it?
Exactly. And I think the key thing we've found again and again in politics over the last few years is momentum. And Rishi Sunak really needs a good run of successes, a good string of policy wins to go and take into those elections. And of course, every time you get something, you get the Rwanda bill, the reversal of last night. You had the big vote against him last week. Next month, you're going to see the by-elections, Julia, in Wellingborough and Kingswood, which they're likely to lose both of those. So you're going to be heading into those spring elections. And of course, remember this time last year, we were all talking about the sort of Rishi rebound effect, etc., after the Windsor Framework vote. And yet we got to the local elections and they were a massive defeat for the Conservatives. So I think the key thing is that Labour want to keep up their record of victories, and Rishi Sunak desperately needs to find some sort of win, because, as you say, otherwise you're going to have a disheartened party tearing itself apart.
Yeah, I mean, and we are certainly seeing that. What do you make also about the culture wars? Because again, obviously, Keir Starmer, I mean, we always told yesterday, he said a major speech. They're all major speeches now. But this idea that the culture wars are being ramped up by the Conservatives, and that he's defending the institutions that are under attack. He named National Trust and Royal National Lifeboat Institute, and the idea that this is something that's being created by people like me, probably people like you, but certainly by the Tory government. And somehow it's all in our heads and we're all just getting our knickers in a twist about something that isn't really an issue. How do you think the culture wars, how do you think that plays for both of the parties, the biggest parties?
Well, I think the key thing about culture war is to make sure you're on the winning side. And Keir Starmer is really trying to pick the battle lines, the ultimate terrain that's most favourable to him. So rather than talking about questions around gender, which we know he doesn't like answering, about what is a woman, etc., he's instead trying to defend himself as the sort of the natural successor to National Trust members, RNLI lifeboats, etc., causes the public really likes. And that's what he's trying to do, is paint the battle lines. And of course, I think it means, you can always talk about culture wars, etc. Frankly, everyone's on one side of the culture war. The key thing is to make sure you're on the side most advantageous to your party. And that's why he's trying to defend the charities and suggesting these wicked Tories, the ones stirring up these culture wars.
But I wonder, though, again, if the commentariat and, the people he goes to dinner parties with in Islington and Hampstead, they'll all agree with him and they'll go, absolutely, yes, we completely agree that there are thousands of women who do have penises because trans women are women. The vast majority of Labour voters think this is all abject nonsense when they know this is what they actually think. They just think that they're literally just like, what are you talking about? You're insane. This doesn't fly down the pub. This doesn't fly on the factory floor. It doesn't fly in most offices when people feel they're safe enough, when the HR director isn't behind them to speak their mind. So why does Labour keep pushing this? Because this is stuff that feeds into a tiny, tiny little number of people who are going to vote Labour anyway. So why do they do it? And also, added to that, why don't the Tories stand up more strongly on this? And instead of just saying things or pushing things or sending directives or guidance to, say, to schools or the NHS, why don't they do something about it?
Well, I think the Tories are themselves slightly divided about the best way to approach all of this. I think the key thing is to really emphasise the issues on which you're most united. And that's why Keir Starmer has chosen to talk about charities, which the whole Labour Party can get behind, rather than more contentious issues on gender. But what you do see, Julia, is just before Christmas, when we saw one Labour MP, Kate Osborne, try to interrogate Kemi Badenoch on these questions, and got absolutely rebuffed and destroyed. And so I think that the Conservatives were being clever. They were trying to make the most of Kemi Badenoch's undoubted success on the cultural issues in her brief as Equalities Minister. The key thing is trying to find where those battles occur and try and emphasise Labour splits on these issues rather than Tory ones.
Absolutely. James Hill, always good to talk to you. Thank you very much indeed.